Hello, everybody. Welcome to Active Minds. Welcome to Atlanta for those of you who came into town for this. We are so excited that you are here. I road tripped into town, and when I was on my way in, I realized that this is a very full circle moment for me. The first time I ever came to Atlanta was also in June. It was also for a FEE event. It was June of 2017. I was 20 years old. It was one of the first real conferences I had ever attended, I think the second. I've attended many conferences since, but I remember this conference vividly because it made such an impression on me. I was very nervous. I'd thrifted my dresses. They didn't quite fit right. Everything was new. I'd never been in a big conference center before. But I remember being so taken by the fact that there were so many interesting people giving talks on so many interesting topics, that people could make a living grappling with ideas and then writing about them and talking about them and sharing them. And that as a 20-year-old, I could show up to a conference in a city I had never been to before with almost no one there that I knew. And I could attend these talks and I could raise my hand and I could ask a question. And I could find the speakers after their talks and I could talk to them and they'd talk to me back. And I could build relationships over the course of the event that to this day, I've maintained with some of the speakers that I met at this conference. I built friendships at that conference that to this day are still alive. And my love of ideas was very deeply solidified because I realized that this was a thing that people could spend their time doing, and that was very exciting to me. I definitely did not think that 7 years later I would be emceeing a FEE event. That's a little crazy. But what I want to do tonight to set the stage for where we're going over the next couple of days, I want to talk a little bit about how I went from there to here, because I employed some of the things that you're going to be learning about over the course of this week's events. I want to talk a little bit about my career story, some of the things that I've learned along the way, and then I want to set the stage for the things that we're going to be doing over the next couple of days, how we're going to approach grappling with ideas, some of the skills that you're going to be learning along the way, and my biggest pieces of advice for how to get the most out of this event that some of you flew all the way across the country to be here, which is amazing. Thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. But first, I want to talk a little bit about my career journey, because for some of you here at an event, maybe for the first time where people are grappling with ideas, you might discover that this is something that you're also very interested in. So I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like to make this work something that supports you in your other endeavors, or maybe something that is an endeavor in and of itself. I spent a lot of my career in the startup world, and one of the things that I was very surprised to discover is that most of the startup founders I met were big philosophy people. I had expected them to know a lot about software and not a lot about much else. And I was very surprised to discover that they were people who were very well read and they could talk about philosophy and economics. And I realized that no matter what you're doing in your path, wherever it takes you, whatever you discover you're interested in and you want to spend time doing, having a solid foundation of ideas is incredibly valuable. It gives you a springboard into wherever really you want to take it. But most of the best things that have happened to me in my career have been complete accidents. I don't think any of the really good things that have happened to me were totally on purpose, but they all came about in a very similar way, seemingly by chance, but because I was following things that I was very innately curious about. A little bit of background on me. I grew up homeschooled all the way through first grade through 12th grade. And I skipped college, which at the time, almost everybody around me thought was a crazy idea. I graduated from high school in 2015. This was a couple of years before the news articles started coming out and all of the big publications questioning the value of college and with statistics about how much college students make and how many people are actually working in the fields they get degrees for, and whether or not a degree is actually a viable choice or the best path for every person. I was deciding to skip college before any of that had been published and those questions were being asked. And so I would Google, should you go to college? And basically everything that would come up would basically just be like, yes, you're making a pretty bad decision if you don't, which was kind of scary. I had many conversations with people who thought I was just kind of throwing my potential away because I was a very academic kid. I loved ideas. I loved reading things. I kind of assumed I was going to be on an academic path. And I think there's a very different version of me, honestly, that is a PhD right now. She's also probably happy, but I'm really glad that I get to be this version of me because I think I get to have more fun, for me personally. And yet, for all intents and purposes, I kind of still do very intellectual work for a living. I run an education media brand called Renegade Educator, where I get to talk to people who are scholars and intellectuals and entrepreneurs in the education space and talk about different ways of educating kids. I run a marketing agency, but a lot of what we do is helping people flesh out their ideas about the brands they're building, their philosophy. I run a podcast where I get to interview experts in the education space, and I'm a writer. And all of those things are very similar types of work to what I would have been doing if I'd taken an academic path. But I just felt like I wasn't sure enough about a career path to know what I wanted to spend tens of thousands of dollars committing to. So I decided I was gonna run a 4-year experiment and see how far I could get without a degree. And in all of my Googling of how is it possible to be successful without college, I discovered this startup apprenticeship program called Praxis that was very new, and that was helping young people land apprenticeships at startups instead of going to business school. And I was like, well, this seems like a really great place to learn how to be successful without college. So I applied for an internship and got a job with them. And I learned a ton. I mostly just wanted to know how to be successful without a college degree, and then I thought I'd go do something else, but I discovered I actually really liked education. You may notice there's a through line between that and what I'm doing now. I'll talk more about this in a little bit. There are lots of through lines that kind of emerged over time between the things that I was interested in early on and the work that I went on to do later. If there's one thing that you take away from what I'm going to talk about here tonight, I hope it's that these through lines often make themselves apparent over time, and you just kind of have to trust that the things you're interested in are going to pay off somehow, and you can't really predict how it's going to play out, so you just kind of have to see what happens. But I worked for the startup apprenticeship program, discovered that I loved the education side of the program, so started working under their education director, TK Coleman, who's also been affiliated with FEE, amazing person, amazing mentor. Got really curious about things like how do you design a curriculum and how do you design a coaching program? And I very slowly kind of built out a role for myself inside of the organization by just asking if I could do things that I was interested in. And that's how I got my start in the education world. And I thought when I went into Praxis that maybe I was gonna be really interested in business, or like maybe I'd wanna go like work for more startups or like become a VC someday or something like that. I thought the startups part was what I was interested in. But it actually was the education, which I had to learn by doing. And while I was at Praxis, I was also talking publicly about education. So I was contributing to their blog. I was going on podcasts to talk about the work I was doing. And I started to build up a little bit of a public-facing portfolio of the work that I had done, which led people who found it to think that maybe I knew something about education. And so when I left Praxis full-time and decided I wanted to be a freelancer, I started getting inbound inquiries from people, which I didn't really know was a thing, from people who had education projects and they were looking for marketing help or some other kind of support, and they'd read my writing. And so they were interested in working for me. And I very excitedly called my mom and was like, oh my gosh, somebody saw my article and wants to talk to me. And that's how I started my work as a freelancer in what eventually became my marketing agency. During this time, I also did a writing fellowship with the team at FEE and with Dan Sanchez, who you'll hear from tomorrow, the Hazlitt Fellowship. And I learned a lot more about like really rigorously vetting ideas and formulating arguments. And I had the chance to publish a bunch with FEE. And during that time, I very randomly met someone who I thought was a dad who was just really excited about his kid's school, and it turned out to be one of the biggest investors in the alternative education world. And he met me and he Googled me and he saw that I'd written a bunch about education, so he read my stuff, and he ended up being the person who backed me starting Renegade Educator, which again was not something I'd ever planned. I didn't know this person existed, but I had been consistently publishing the writing that I was doing on the things that I was interested in. And that allowed this seemingly very, very random synchronicity to occur. I have since been spending the past couple years writing a lot about education. If you're on Twitter, I tweet a lot. I have a podcast now where I interview experts in the education space every week, and I get to talk to them about building schools and the research that they've done, and I've learned a ton through that process. My rule of thumb is basically just if I'm curious about talking to somebody, I'll invite them on the show, and pretty much always I learn quite a bit. And this past spring, I had the chance to help run the inaugural cohort of the Cole Summers Fellowship, which is one of the newest programs at FEE for young writers going through alternative education programs. And I had the chance to run that with Dan Sanchez and with Lolita Allgaier, who you'll get to meet tomorrow. And again, that came about, the team at FEE knew me at this point because I had done a fellowship with them as a fellow, but they were reading my writing about education and they said, hey, do you wanna help other people learn how to write about this too? Again, this was a thing I never planned. I never intended to help build a fellowship, but because of the work that I had done, learning things and then putting what I was learning out into the world, a principle we called learning out loud, which we'll talk about a lot over the course of this conference too, I was able to build up a presence that started to draw interesting opportunities to me. It sounds like there's a lot of very clear through lines through all of this. Like I could tell the story and I could be like, so I decided I was going to land this internship at this startup because I knew it would launch my education career. And the goal was just 4 years from that, I'd get to start this media brand. And then a couple years later, I could run a fellowship. I did not plan any of this. I didn't know any of this was going to happen. It was all an accident. There's the late, great Clayton Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard Business School, has this sort of duality for how to think about your path in life. He calls it the emergent life path and the deliberate life path. And the idea is that when you embark on a journey, whether it's the journey of your career or the journey of your education or the journey in a specific project that you've decided to embark in, you can either take a very deliberate path where you say, I'm going to do X in order to get to Y, in order to get to Z, and you're only focused on those steps and you know exactly where you're going from the beginning. Or you can take more of an emergent path where you say, I don't really know where I'm going to end up, but I trust the process of iteration that's going to consistently lead me to the next step. And I trust that the path will emerge over time. Emergent paths are not just viable. I would argue that they're actually better often than a very deliberate path. There's a couple reasons why. When I worked at Praxis, I started working with the education department and eventually I became a coach. And I worked with hundreds of kids who went through the program. And sometimes I would work with kids who would have a very, very specific goal. They would say, I want to work in a marketing job at my favorite fashion company or something like that. And they would get laser focused on that goal. And anything else that might come up, they would say no to. It was like, what about this really cool marketing job at this really fast-growing media company? And they say, no, that's not the company I want to work for. I don't want the job. What about this sales job at this company that you're really excited about? No, it's not marketing. I really want to be the social media manager. If you're really focused on something, it's okay to commit to it. And you have to trust your own intuition that if you know something's right for you, it's okay to be really focused on getting it. But sometimes when you get really focused on a goal, you start to miss out on all the other lovely possibilities that are also arising for you. It's entirely possible that you really want a job at a company that just doesn't have a job for you right now. There's not something that's a fit. And so if you're so committed to this goal, you might not work at all until eventually this company decides to give you a job. And you could be 2 years later still waiting on a job offer from this company that's not sending you one. That is entirely possible. These things happen. On the flip side, there might be a reason why this isn't a fit yet. There might be, maybe you don't have the skills yet. Maybe you don't have the portfolio. Maybe it's just a really competitive company and you need a little bit more of a track record for them to be ready to take a chance on you. But if you are open to an emergent path, even if you know that eventually the goal is to work for this company that's my dream job and I just love their products and I just want to be on their marketing team because I love nothing would make me happier than waking up every morning and getting to do that. There might be a very circuitous path that's actually the path that gets you there. Maybe you say yes to the job that is a marketing role at a different company and you get some wins under your belt and you build up a track record, and then you can bring that to this company that's actually your dream role and say, hey, let me do this for you. And I can already prove to you that I know how. Or maybe you take the sales role inside this company and you start to build a network inside the organization, and eventually you get to pivot over to the role that you want. Or maybe there's some third path that you haven't even thought of that will eventually get you there. The more open you are to these different ways of things unfolding, the more you're able to open yourself up to the path that's actually the best fit for you. And sometimes you don't have to have this laser-focused end goal at all. Sometimes you can just do things that seem interesting in the moment and not even know how it's gonna play out in another year or in 2 years, which has mostly been the story of my career. I always knew I was interested in writing. I knew pretty early on I would go to conferences and I'm like, wow, I want to learn how to talk like the people who get up on stage. That sounds like a fun skill to have. But I didn't really plan it out. I just kept saying yes to the things that were interesting to me. And as I got through more and more of my career, I started to realize that the through lines went back even past the start of my career. They went back even into my childhood and the things that I was interested in. When I was a kid, I loved stories and I loved writing. And I would have been a little disappointed with myself that I was writing nonfiction as an adult, but I would have been very excited to know that I was getting to write all the time as an adult because that was something that I loved. When I was coaching at Praxis, one of the things I started telling the kids was to trust their own curiosities and to use it as a compass. Your curiosities exist for a reason. There's a reason why you're interested in something. And they all have a common denominator, which is you. And there are things in you that make you interested in all of the things that you're interested in and all of the things that you will ever be interested in. And those things are likely more related than they might appear at first glance. And you can trust that. You can trust that you're really interested in a topic that feels highly irrelevant to any work that you could ever possibly do or any way you could ever make money. And I think that's still worth trusting. To my point earlier about the startup founders who were all well-read philosophically, part of what made them great at doing the work that they did is that they thought about things that weren't just startups and weren't just companies. So they were able to come up with ideas by synthesizing information from all different sources that people who'd only read business books and never anything else couldn't come up with because they didn't have the deep well to draw from of new ideas that could be assembled in new ways. And so sometimes those niche things that you're interested in actually will pay off in very unexpected ways. But sometimes they'll also pay off in ways that are actually very similar to the actual core of the interest, but just in ways that you can't yet predict. There's a great researcher in the education space. He's a developmental psychologist. His name is Peter Gray. He's a very big advocate for the importance of childhood play. Perhaps you've encountered him before. He wrote an amazing book that's a staple of the education world called Free to Learn. And Peter Gray had a son who hated school. And at age 9, he pretty much went on strike and was like, I'm not going to school anymore, and just informed everyone. And Peter Gray decided, okay, well, this is clearly not working very well. I'm open to letting him try an alternative school. And the Grays lived in Massachusetts, and they happened to be in the vicinity of this very quirky, kind of hippie alternative school called Sudbury Valley, which you may be familiar with. It's become a movement. There are schools all over the country, but the original Sudbury Valley was in Massachusetts. And Peter Gray decided to send his son there. But Peter Gray was also a psychologist. He was a researcher, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna send my son here, but I also wanna make sure that my son's actually gonna get an education that's not going to ruin his life, that he is still gonna be set up for success. And so with the help of the Sudbury Valley School, he reached out to all of the graduates of the school. There were 80 or 90 of them at the time. It was still a pretty new school. He actually heard back from the vast majority of them. And he sent them all a survey, and most of them filled out the survey. And he asked them a ton of questions. Again, he was an academic researcher, so his question list was very, very thorough. But he asked them lots of questions about, what do you do for work? And how much money do you make? And how long have you been doing it? And what was your path to get here? And what did you study when you were in school? And he realized that there were very clear through lines for many of the kids. There was one student who was 22 years old at the time of the survey, and he was running a $1 million software startup. He had come to Sudbury Valley School after his 7th grade year. He was completely disgusted with his public school education, but he was really into computers. And so he learned how to program when he was in school, and over the course of just organically pursuing his interests, he also became very interested in business. And so by the time he graduated from high school, he'd already studied business, and he was ready to open his own company, which he did, and he did successfully. But there was a very clear through line between what he wanted to do when he was in high school and what he ended up doing for a living once he graduated. There was another student, a young woman, who was very interested in boats. She would get toy boats and she would play with them on the pond at the school when she was a little kid. And then when she got older, she figured out a way where she could be off campus some days, and she would go to the local harbor and she would start learning about nautical navigation and ships. And she ended up landing an apprenticeship with a ship's captain. And by the time she was in her 20s, she was the captain of a cruise ship. Again, very clear through line between what seemed to be fairly innocuous and maybe even not very helpful play when she was a kid. It's like, oh, she's just playing with her toy boat. She should be doing her math homework. That she's never gonna make a living playing with toy boats. This is not a waste of her time. Very clear through line between that and what she ended up doing for work. Another student became a pattern maker in the high fashion world at a very successful company. When she was a kid, she loved fabric. She loved the pretty prints on the fabrics, and she started making clothes for her dolls. And then when she was in high school, she started making clothes for herself and then for her friends. And when she was an adult, she already had a portfolio that she could take into the fashion world, and she already knew what she loved. So she was able to go work in fashion and eventually became a pattern maker, which was always her dream. Each of these, again, has a very clear line. And probably at the beginning and even in the middle of these journeys, the line was not clear. It's like when you're watching a really well-done movie or you're reading a really well-done novel and you're in the middle and you're like, man, I hope they make it. I hope they win. I hope everybody's okay. But you don't actually know what's going to happen. You don't actually know how you're going to get to the end because unless you're like a reader who skips to the end because you can't stand the suspense, you don't know how it's going to play out. And you can't even always tell what in the novel is like really good foreshadowing, where it's like a hint of what's coming, and you get to the end and you're like, oh man, this was so good. Like that, Easter egg that she found in the middle of the book actually was super important to the plot. I see it now. Real life's kind of the same way. And if you are following your interests in a very pure sense, you're just trusting the process, you're really not always going to see how it's going to play out, and you're not always going to know where you're going to end up, and that is okay, and you can trust that. Like I said, I started to notice these patterns as I got further and further in my career, where there were sort of these recurring, echoing themes. Education was a really big one for me because I grew up alternatively educated. I didn't go to school or real public school or college. And I started writing about it because it was just kind of interesting to me, and I thought maybe it could be helpful to somebody. And then over time, that became more and more of a recurring theme in the writing I was doing and eventually the work I was doing. I always loved writing, and I would write about everything, and some of my writing projects were complete flops. I started a Substack a few years ago, and I asked one of my friends who actually read it every week. I was like, what do you think my Substack's about? And he's like, I don't know. I think it's just you kind of like trying to figure out what you think about things. And I was like, ouch, but you're right. It kind of is. But some of the things I've written have also been like really valuable to me in my own process and my own career journey, but hopefully to other people too. But I had to go through a lot of the muddy work of figuring out how all these pieces fit together in order to get there. And some of these things materialize into really significant opportunities, like landing jobs and building a business. All of the clients of my agency, I've never, ever done any sales work. People come to me because they see my work on Twitter, or they see Renegade Educator, or they hear my podcast, or they read one of my articles, and they want to know if they can hire me. I'm like, well, no, but I do have an agency, and maybe we can help you. I totally didn't have an agency the first time I said that, but I was like, I have people who kind of work for me. Like, we could make this like official. And I have a business now because I've consistently put things out into the world. There are through lines between everything I'm talking about and what this conference is about. And I want to kind of set the stage for why this event even exists, what the logic is behind how it's structured, why we chose the things that we chose to walk you through over the course of the next couple of days, and how it ties back to what I'm talking about chasing the things that you're interested in and discovering over time how they fit together and what path might emerge from them. The design of this conference was architected by Dan Sanchez, who also ran the fellowship that I went through, the Hazlitt Project. And it's designed in a very deliberate way. Over the course of the next couple of days, and particularly tomorrow, you're gonna get to hear from a number of speakers talking about ideas that they were once curious about, who studied those ideas, read them, talked about them, debated them, talked about them some more, wrote some more, eventually hammered them out, and are now experts in the subjects that they're gonna be talking about. They're gonna be introducing you to some of these ideas. You're gonna get the chance to hear from them. You're gonna get the chance to grapple with the ideas that they're talking about, see what you think about them. And once you've listened to these talks, we're gonna take you back to some of the source texts that influenced them, some of the writings from famous authors or great thinkers that shaped the way they think. And we're going to walk you through some of the same exercises that we were all trained in, that we train the fellows who go through our fellowship programs in, that everybody on the FEE team, I think this is safe to say, has used at some point in time. We're gonna walk you through the exercises, And we're going to challenge you to look at these same texts and first rewrite them in your own words, which is one of the first steps of thinking before you come up with your own ideas. You want to grapple with the ideas of others as your starting point, but learn how to work with them and reframe them in ways that feel true to you. If you can take somebody else's idea and then you can put it out into the world but say it differently, that means you understand it. So we're gonna walk you through that process, and then you're gonna have the chance to talk to each other and to us and to debate these ideas and to make arguments and counter arguments and like really grapple with what you think. And this conference is intended to be a very safe place to grapple with these ideas. You're not being held to anything that you say here. If you want to argue devil's advocate just for fun, and then next week you're like, actually, I think I was wrong. I actually think I believe this. That's okay. That's encouraged. We all do that too, to figure out what we believe about things. But you're going to have the chance to go through the same process that we have all gone through many, many times to hone our own thinking about things. And the goal is for this conference to, one, introduce you to some of the ideas that are interested in too, in hopes that you find them useful, but more importantly, to build tools of thinking that are going to carry with you as a way of engaging with ideas for the rest of your life. Anytime you find something new that you are interested in, you want to learn more about, hopefully what you learn over the next couple of days will give you a foundation to know not just how to Google something and like find an article or a book or an answer, but how to really grapple with that answer and make it your own. And then from that, build off of it and see what you think or where you might take that idea next. I also have a few notes around how this conference is going to be structured, and also some pieces of advice. Things I wish I knew when I came to my first conference that hopefully can be helpful to you. First, a couple of housekeeping notes. Chaperones, thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful that you took time out of your busy days to be in Atlanta for half of a week to support all of these young people in learning about the things we're talking about here. We're very grateful you came. We're also really excited to talk to you. So if you have questions, if you want to talk to us, all of the speakers are going to be around for the whole event. So we will be available during the break times, in between talks. You are very welcome also to come up and talk to us. That time is not just for the students, it's for you too. When we're in the room though, we're going to ask that when we do Q&A, the microphones are only passed to students. We want to make sure when we're in this space that we're giving as many students as possible time to come to the mic and ask questions. And then you can come find us after the sessions and ask us all your questions too. Students, I have a few pieces of advice for how to get the most out of this event. The first is you all have a workbook, a beautiful workbook designed by the FEE design team. I see some of you taking notes in it already. You guys are ahead of the game. Love it. I would highly, highly recommend utilizing this workbook. There are going to be sessions where we're going to prompt you more directly to use it for different exercises. But I highly recommend using the notes section in every session. And I have a couple specific recommendations on that front. The first is I would highly recommend jotting down questions as a speaker is talking. At the end of every session, we're gonna have some time for Q&A. We may or may not have time to get to everyone's questions, but if we don't, you'll be able to come find us afterwards. We're gonna be around, we're gonna be available. As we're talking, there probably are things that are triggering your interest or that if we were just having a conversation, you'd wanna know more about. But by the time you get to the end of the talk and you've listened to a whole bunch of information, you're probably not gonna remember them all. This is one of my very favorite pieces of advice that I was given very early on in my writing and attending events journey. My mentor, TK Coleman, told me, I was like, how do I get the most out of going to a session? And he told me, always take a paper and pen, and anytime somebody says something interesting, write it down. And the goal is that when it comes to the Q&A session, if nobody else has a question, you can be like, okay, well, I have like 10. And you can take advantage of the time when you have the speaker on stage and they have nothing else to do but answer your questions. And you can ask them all kinds of follow-ups of all the things that they kind of skipped over the course of telling you a story or making a point. The goal is to always have something to say if the room is quiet. Not because you want to fill space, like don't ask a question if you don't actually think you have something that you're sincerely interested in. But you're in a very large room and we're gonna have more people here tomorrow. We have a bunch of people here on day passes who are gonna be joining us for tomorrow's sessions. We're gonna talk to a lot of you, but you're much more likely to start to build a relationship with the speakers on the stage if they remember that you asked a question. Also remember that everybody who is here has spent many, many hours thinking about the things that they're talking about, and many of them spent quite a bit of time crafting their talks as well. And if you raise your hand and ask a follow-up question and you like clearly are thinking about what they're talking about, they're gonna remember that because they're gonna be grateful. They're gonna be so excited that you're interested in these things too. Speakers will remember the people in the audience the most who ask the questions, so don't be shy. I was definitely terrified at my first few conferences, but I promise, like speaking now from the other side, the person on the stage, I don't think you could ask me anything that I would think is a dumb question, like at all. And I get really excited when people do have questions, so ask us anything when we're up on the stage. And then use this as a networking opportunity. So you have all of us in this conference space for the next, almost 2 days. And we're gonna be floating around in between our talks. You can come up and ask us questions. You can tell us what you thought of our talks. You can ask us follow-ups. And after the talks and after the event, I would highly recommend, most of us are on Twitter. Feel free to come follow us on Twitter. You can send us a message and thank us for hosting this event or for giving talks or mention something in particular that you found interesting. I remember a lot of, I don't know if I remember every single person, but I'm pretty sure I do. I'm pretty sure I haven't forgotten anybody. I remember everybody who sends me a message afterwards and says something specific that they appreciated about a talk that I gave. It really sticks with me because again, like everybody who gives a talk, we took time to formulate this and to get up on stage, and sometimes we don't know how it went or if it was useful. It's a great way to build a relationship. And then start engaging online. Like we're all on Twitter. You can like our tweets, you can comment on them, you can add your own thoughts, you can engage in a conversation. If you see something that we wrote online and you find it interesting, you can reach out to us and tell us what you thought. If you read something that you think we'd like, you can send it to us. If you wrote something and you're like, hey, this was inspired by something you talked about, or it references something you talked about, or it was like kind of tangentially related to the conversation we had before, send it to us. We'd love to see it. This isn't just a place for you to come and listen to us talk. We really want this to be a springboard for your journey. But don't be afraid to use us as a resource. We're not just talking people on a stage. We're real people too, and we're excited to talk to you. We have a couple minutes left, so I'm gonna tell you a very quick story before we go over to Q&A. When I first started working with Praxis, I was an intern working maybe a handful of hours a week. It was a very small role. And I'm pretty sure they thought that hiring me as an intern was part of their recruitment pipeline to get me to do the program. And I was pretty sure that getting hired to be an intern was part of their pipeline to bring me in to have a real job. And so I just wanted to take on all the work that I possibly could. I just found everything interesting. I was like, if I get to be here for 4 months, which was how long my internship was, and then that's it, they don't hire me and I move on, I'm gonna get everything out of this that I possibly can. So I started attending, they hosted weekly workshops. And every week they'd have a guest speaker come on, TK Coleman would interview them, and then we'd all get a chance to ask questions. And I started making a point to always have a question to ask because I was like, well, if I'm, only here temporarily, I really want to connect with these people. So this can be my network too, even if I'm not here. And so I started asking questions in all the sessions. And I didn't know at the time, but TK had way too much on his plate. And he was looking to find somebody who could host these sessions for him. Somebody who could come in and kind of podcast style, interview somebody who could coordinate all the bookings and stuff. and then like handle all the logistics and leave lots of space for everybody else there to also ask questions. And so I had no idea any of that was going on. I was just asking questions because I very selfishly wanted to connect with people and learn. I remember TK reached out to me. He's like, hey, can you jump on a call? I have an idea. So I got on a call with him and he's like, I'm looking for somebody to host these calls and I think it should be you. And I was like, could you say that again? I don't think I heard you right. And he said it again. I was like, okay, wow, you really did say that. And I was like, why? And he's like, because you ask great questions. And so I know that you can facilitate a whole interview. Like, I know you'll be great at it because you're already doing it. And I was like, oh, I thought I was just trying to build a network in case you guys fired me. Okay. And about a month later, I started hosting the sessions. And I was so nervous. I had no idea what I was doing. But I ended up doing that for like 5 years. And it was amazing. And it happened because I was just showing up and I was sincerely curious about talking to people and learning from them. And I selfishly wanted my own questions to be answered. And that turned into eventually a full-time job working in the education department, which again, I never could have predicted. I didn't know that was going to happen, but it turned out to be a perfect role for me at the time and then a perfect springboard into everything that I did after. Lolita Allgaier, who you'll meet tomorrow, also did Praxis. And I remember her coming through the program because I was working for the program, and I noticed immediately that she asked tons of questions. She always had questions, she always had ideas, and I was like, they're totally gonna hire her. And then like 5 months later, they did. People notice when you're the curious person in the room, and they love it. The world is starved for curious people. Employers want to hire them. They don't want to hire somebody that they have to tell everything to. They want to hire somebody who can say, look, I have this problem. I don't know how to solve it either. Could you please help me? And you can go figure it out. And you can be valuable to them, but you have to be curious in order to be able to do that. Employers want to work with curious people. People who are thinkers and writers and academics love talking to curious people, especially if you're young. It's a superpower. You can reach out and ask questions and people will be so excited to talk to you. Cultivating your curiosity is probably the most important piece of career and life advice I could give anybody. And the hope is that the next couple of days will be a springboard for that for you. Make this conference your own. Bring up the questions that you're interested in. Don't be shy. We threw this for you. We spent months planning this for you guys in hopes that you get the most out of this. So take the microphone when you have a question. Come find us in the breaks. Grapple with the ideas that you're interested in. Don't be shy about having a wrong idea or a bad take. We've all had them too, and also I don't think you, like, what's a bad take anyway? It's just a different opinion. That's the whole point. Have fun, and let us know how we can support you over the next couple of days. I'm gonna open this up now for Q&A because I wanna give plenty of time for us to chat. I see a hand over here already. Abby, I don't know who I'm asking. How does this work? Is there a microphone that gets passed around, or do we just talk really loudly? Okay, amazing. Hi. Really quickly, if you have a question, do you mind, before you ask the question, sharing your name and where you're here from?
Yes. I'm Elisa. I'm Elisa Jimenez Marti, and I'm from Puerto Rico.
Oh my gosh, welcome.
And my question is, after your through line became clear, how did you and others feel?
I mean, I was just kind of relieved, honestly. Like, I was really glad that this whole thing worked because I wasn't sure. I kind of thought I'd have to go back to college a few years later and I don't know, start doing the right thing finally. Oh, yeah, good, thank you, good call. The question from Elisa, yes?
After your through line became clear, how did you and others feel?
Yeah, so after my through line became clear, how did I and others feel? There's a couple pieces to this. I was very relieved, obviously. One thing that I didn't mention is that a lot of people were very worried about me because I didn't take the traditional path. A lot of my extended family worked in public education and higher education, and I don't think my grandmothers ever really fully were okay, she's gonna be okay. I think they were always worried about me. And so I think they were still worried about me even after the through line became clear because in their mind, I was doing the thing you're not supposed to do. But for me, I just felt, it was very subtle, right? These things happen over a slow amount of time. It's kind of like building muscle. it happens very slowly. And so you don't really see it. You don't look in the mirror and you're like, wow, I am like 0.5% more muscular than I was last week. You don't see it. Eventually you go and you pick something up that you expected to be heavy. You're like, that was not that heavy. I think I built some muscle. It's kind of the same thing. So it kind of would hit me at points where I'd look back and I'd realize that there was this really clear line that I'd been following, almost as if I could see it, even though I definitely couldn't because I didn't know it was there. And over time, I just became more and more kind of trusting of the process, like more comfortable that if I was really interested in something, I could just go for it. And that somehow it would make sense, even if I couldn't predict it at the time. Good question. Yeah, that's a really good metaphor. She said it's like walking through the snow. And when you look back, you see the path that you followed. It's very obvious that there are footprints in the otherwise bare snow, but you can't see a path before you while you're walking. I love that. Can I steal that? I love that. Or write about it and then publish it and tag me. That's really good. You're iterating on the ideas already. I love it. Who else has questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Saidi. I also come from Puerto Rico.
Welcome.
My English is a bit rusty, so I'm sorry. Just wanted to comment and to make a question, but first a comment. I relate a lot to your experience in this conference. I didn't expect or plan to actually be here, so it's really, I'm really relatable to actually be here at this moment.
Maybe in another 7 years I'll see one. Who knows?
Yeah, I like until 5 minutes ago, I'm like, is this real? Really?
I promise we're real.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm really grateful for the opportunity and the experience. And my question is, has it in any way, affected you in your life, mentally or emotionally, the fact that you made the decision to not go to the university at some point of your life?
Yeah, does the decision affect me at any point? Or and how does it affect me that I decided not to go to university? I mean, practically it affects me a lot and also very little. A lot kind of because I've made my career talking about education, so I bring it up a lot. But I think if I didn't do that, I don't think anybody would really care anymore because once you have professional experience, unless you're doing a job that requires credentialing, people really don't care about where you went to school. They just kind of care about, okay, show me what you did in your last job, answer our questions about what you'd be doing in this job, and we'll figure out if you're a good fit. I also, in some ways, I thought it would affect me more than it actually did. People say, oh, you need to go to college so that you can build a network and so that you can be employable and so that you can make friends and so that you can have real world experience kind of in like a safer place than just being thrown out into the real world right away and trying to figure it out in like the real game. And I honestly think Twitter has made a lot of that kind of irrelevant because you can go on Twitter and start talking to people who are professors at Harvard and they don't care that you don't go there if you have an interesting question, and you can start building the network too. So in some ways it's affected me almost less than I expected it to. But I think psychologically it affected me maybe more than I expected because I'm less afraid of not doing the right thing, and I'm less afraid of stepping off the conventional path because I was so scared to do it the first time, but it actually worked out. And I think that made me a little bit bolder. And I run an education brand called Renegade Educator that used to be called Rebel Educator. I'm pretty comfortable like going against the grain and just being like, yeah, sorry, this is, I think this. You're allowed to disagree with me. We can talk about it. And I think that was emboldened by not taking the status quo path. I was very agreeable. I still am. And very much like a people pleaser. So I think if I'd gone on the normal path, I would have just been, I think that would have been I would have had to break that habit somewhere else. But that's also kind of been an important thing for me to get more comfortable with people thinking I'm wrong. And that was one of the things that helped me personally overcome that. Other questions? Yes. And where are you here from? Brazil.
Yeah.
We should have a contest. Who came the farther for this? This is amazing.
So my question is, how did you feel comfortable with making such a choice that
I feel you. The question is if so she's also grappling with, you said Elisa. Elisa's also grappling with, should I take the safe path or should I take the one that I'm more excited about, but that's going to make me feel maybe less or more fulfilled, but it's not as safe. And how was I, did I basically, how was I brave enough to do that, right? Or what gave me the courage? There were a couple of things. One is everybody told me I was a crazy except for my parents. My parents were like, we really don't care. Do whatever you want. We trust you. And that really helped, having somebody who believed in me. But I also just kind of ran the mental math. And I was like, okay, if I'm totally wrong and this doesn't work, I can always just go back on the normal path. And I'll be a couple years older than everybody else. And that might feel awkward. And I might be a little in my own ego about it, but it's not going to hurt anything. I'm not making any irreparable mistakes. And I think that there are very few things in life that are actually, truly unrecoverable from. Barring physical injury or something that's inside the laws of physics, a lot of things you actually can change your mind about later. If you're making a choice about one path and then later you're actually, I don't like this career. I want to go do something else. You're not locked in for life. And when I realized that, I think that made me feel a lot braver about doing the thing that I was really excited about first. I'd kind of ask myself, what's the story I'd most like to read? Okay, I'm going to do that first. And then if that doesn't pan out, I can still go do the other thing. Other questions? Yes.
Well, I'm Tomás. I'm from Argentina.
You win so far.
And I have a question because, in my life it happened something similar to me, taking another path, but because I was really organized, and then suddenly everything changed. But you said that you choose that path and it worked. But my question is, as she said, the path with snow, you don't know where you're going, and I feel, and maybe it happens to you, that you always have the anxiety or enthusiasm of what is going to happen in 1 week, in 1 month, in 2 years, and it's always that pressure that you wake up and you don't know what is going to happen. And I was going to ask you, how did you handle that expectations all these years?
Great question. If anybody didn't catch it, how do you handle the uncertainty of not knowing how things are going to pan out and getting how do you stay from being very stressed out about it? Again, the backup plan thing is really, really helpful. I realized pretty early on that if you know what to do and you don't know what to do, then you don't have anything to be afraid of anymore. So I realized that if things didn't go the way that I wanted them to, I knew I had kind of safety nets that I put in place for myself. It's okay, I have a little bit of savings. So if I lose this job, I'll still be okay. Or okay, if this career path doesn't pan out, I know I have connections over here and I can go talk to those people and maybe land a new job. Even if you don't have those connections, just knowing okay, if I lose my job tomorrow, or I don't get this job I'm banking on, or this other big career play doesn't pan out, what can I do instead? Sometimes I still tell myself this if I'm stressed out about my company. I'm I can always go get a job. I could apply for a job if this doesn't work out, and that makes me feel better every time. I'm okay, this is, I'm gonna be all right. So I think that's really helpful to think about. Is just what do you if you don't know what to do, what is your fallback plan? And as soon as you can kind of think through that, then it's a little easier to relax into the process again. I see a question over here too.
Hey, my name's Jake Carr, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm interested in your site or website, Renegade Educator.
Mm-hmm.
So if I hopped on it, what would I find? What's it like? Is it in addition to my education already, or could it be could it also be a full-time thing?
Oh, good question. What is Renegade Educator? So I don't actually it's not a school, it's not a program. My current goal is to help as many parents as possible find the right education path for that kid, for their kids rather, even if it's not the status quo path. So I write about alternatives to the public education system. I talk about different types of alternative education that is emerging, how to think about education, the history of education, different pedagogical approaches, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a resource hub. I direct people to a lot of different types of schools depending on what they're interested in, but I don't currently have one that I'm building. It's more of a jumping off point for kind of the movement of alternatives to public education. I realized that lots of parents want options, but nobody really knows where to find them. So my goal was let me create a hub where people can start finding things, and then they can find whatever path is best for them.
So it's more like a guide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We have time for one more. You.
My name is Fisher. I come from Syria.
Welcome. Yeah, Syria, Argentina. I actually don't know. How long was your flight to get here? How many were there? You're like, there were 7. Let me add it up. Welcome.
I wanted to ask you about taking the difference between taking a deliberate path and an emerging path.
Yeah.
So I found that it's very difficult for me to take emerging path because like I cannot deal with so much uncertainty. So how do you feel about like taking a deliberate path but also opening the possibilities for other things and not limiting oneself to other options?
Amazing. What did you say your name was again? Bisher? Bisher from Syria. Welcome. Wants to know, how do you balance the deliberate path versus the emergent path if the emergent path makes you very anxious? So here's the fun thing about making your own path is you get to make it whatever you want and whatever is best for you. So if you're not comfortable with the emergent thing and the deliberate path is really what feels good to you, do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I would say be mindful mostly of unnecessarily closing yourself off to opportunities just because they don't feel like they fit the plan that you have in mind. Like, I would, as objectively as possible, look at the things in front of you and say, this might not be what I planned, but what would it look like to go from this thing back to what I did plan? Because sometimes you might find it's actually the stepping stone that bridges a gap that otherwise would be too wide to leap. But besides that, do what feels good. Do we have time for any more? Okay. I saw a bunch more hands. This is awesome, guys. We're gonna have so much fun this week. Come find me at dinner. I'm happy to answer all the questions that we didn't have time for. Logistics? Okay, amazing.